eating and what the science of eating behaviors can teach you about being kinder to yourself. The speaker who comes now, she comes with 2 decades of experience as a strategic brand and communications professional. She's even worked with global brands such as MTV and RBS. Rochna Poddar, you can start walking up to the stage in the interest of time. Please welcome her. She decided to answer her inner calling, to use health as a pivot, to guide people to be the best versions of themselves. After struggling with health issues at the age of 16 that remained undiagnosed, Rochna began exploring different ways of nurturing mind and body through a variety of integrative health practices. She's a certified mind-body medicine practitioner and integrative health coach from Saybrook University, USA, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you, thank you. So these big words partially scared me. I'm sure it's intimidating to some of us as well. But let's just break it up for a second, right? We all know the word psychology and we know the word biology. Psychology is what goes on in our heads, one aspect of it. Biology is how we interpret our body. Now, a lot of times we find ourselves in conflict between mind and body, and food being something that is so central to our lives, to how we think, how we breathe, to everything that we do, the interaction between mind and body in this often is a source of conflict, right? This is something that I've pondered about, perhaps struggled with for such a large part of my life that I did want to spend some time delving into it a little deeper. And it's been a journey where I've been learning. And I'm just here today to share with you some of the things I've learned in the last few years. And yeah, let's see what that teaches us about ourselves. Sin, guilt, shame, indulgence, regret. When was the last time you guys used these words? Did this have anything to do with it? Or should I say this? Right? We live in a world where forget about the 7 deadly sins. It's all come down to our relationship with food. Our mental narrative to ourselves is so much about food. You go to a restaurant, flip to the dessert section. What are the terms that's used? Sinful indulgence, sinful something. It's all building to this idea that by doing something that you actually enjoy, you're doing something bad for yourself. Death by chocolate, thank you very much. We have all these, food consultants here who would have a long list to add to, ways to make ourselves feel worse about ourselves. So I ask you, how kind is that narrative to you? In what way are you really serving yourself when our mental narrative to do with the very source and resource of existence is so negative, right? We have this idea that we're making all these choices, that we're making bad choices as a result of it, as a result of which we look a certain way, we feel a certain way. And this is why I call this the myth of control. What you will realize over a period of time, and hopefully through some of what we'll discuss today, is that actually most of our choices we really have no say over. We are a function of our environments. We are a function of generations and generations of practices. And where you find yourself sitting today is just sheer dumb luck. Let's see how. This is Mani, right? Mani is 45. He lives in a small fishing village in rural Tamil Nadu. He is a father of 4, maybe 5. Yeah, he's a father of 4. He has 3 grandkids. The whole family lives together. They eat together. Everyone is in the same village. They are on the brink of subsistence, which means that they pretty much survive on rations that are doled out, which is what, rice and dal. And because they're a fishing community, the occasional fish, the occasional egg finds its way into a part of their diet. This is Ella. Ella is 28. She lives in Beijing. Ella is a nurse. She's also a single mom, which means she works crazy hours. There is no schedule that she follows. There is no eating pattern, sleep pattern. Everything depends on when that emergency bell goes off. What does Ella do for food? When she has a single mom, so she's obviously responsible for putting food on the table, literally and figuratively. So when she's running home, she grabs takeout, she eats leftovers, and that's what food looks like for her. Antonio is a college student in Peru. He's studying sociology. He also comes from a fairly economically challenged background, which means his parents have really had to struggle to put food on the table. They've barely managed to pay his college fees. So Antonio's, in order to save money, he essentially eats on campus, which tends to be, unfortunately, the cheapest food that's available. In this case, it's bread, eggs, and pasta. Look at these three individuals in just a second. Okay, we're going back. So anyway, the point I was making there is when you take a step back and see these three lives, I ask you, how much choice do you think they had in eating any of those things? How much of that is a function of simply where they were born, when they were born, what kind of families they were born into? So the point I'm making here is that we're no different. All of us represent a slice of society. We represent a slice of time and life. So our food choices as well, by definition, are governed by things like our society, culture, which is a broader construct. You have environment, which is your immediate family, right? And we'll get a little deeper into these over the course of the session. And then there's you sitting right in the middle of all of this, believing that we're so in control of everything. Are we ready? So if you look at the spectrum of control, that's really how it goes. We are a function of our environments, but at the same time, finally the choices we make are our own, right? And that power sits with us. Let's look at this in a little more depth. Now, here's a quiz. Tell me what you ate for breakfast today. This is breakfast images from around the world. Can you guys see it from here? Do you want me to move to the side? I see some really strange expressions. What? None of this? Nobody ate any of this? But this is from around the world. Okay, fine. I know what you're saying. You're saying, but none of this looks like Indian food, right? Fair. So none of you ate this. Oh, I need to go back. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So this is all pictures of food from India at different socioeconomic groups. So a family that makes $30 a month, that's what they eat. On the other end of the spectrum, a family that makes $6,000 a month, that's what they eat. Where do you fit in? And it's not about what money you make, right? The point is that if you notice, if there is something you're eating, there are a million other things you're not eating. What is that a function of? That's a function of where you live. That's a function of whether you're born today or 100 years ago. That's a function of what community you're born into. It's a function of what socioeconomic group you're born into. It's a function of what religion you're born into. So really, how much of this is in your choice? How much? Deciding whether you're eating a baked samosa or a fried samosa, I don't know if that's really your choice. Let's move on. Let's look at the environment. What do I mean by environment in this case? It means our immediate surroundings. It means our immediate influences. It's some of the choices or rather the influences that we choose and some that find ourselves in our environment. You don't just inherit genes, you inherit habits. So if you're unwell, you go get a blood test, you go to a doctor and say you get diagnosed with diabetes. What is the first thing your doctor asks you? Is it in your family? Is your mom, your dad, your grandparents, is anybody diabetic? Right? Half the truth. Because what happens is when you're born into a certain family, you're not just getting those genes. You're also eating the same way, you're living the same way, you're watching the same content, we're inheriting all those habits. And the way to think about this is that your DNA is not your destiny. Your dinner is your destiny. Genes are like a loaded gun. But if nobody pulls that trigger, you're absolutely fine your whole life. There is no risk there. Right? This is a very interesting documentary on Netflix that I'd encourage everyone to watch. It's called You Are What You Eat. So they took 41 pairs of twins, and twins, as we know, are as close as it gets genetically as anybody else, right? So they took 41 pairs of twins and put them through an 8-week program of 2 different diets. Same genes, 2 different diets, right? And diet is just one aspect of it. At the end of 8 weeks, their blood work, their lipid profile, their not genetic, but bodily composition, all of that was completely different. How did that happen? Right? So, but remember that this is again to say that while you're controlled to an extent by your genes, you're also controlled by the habits of your family. Another big aspect that plays a role is just childhood. How many kids here who've been forced by parents to eat? Finish your plate. I know one predictable hand that's going up there. That's my niece. I'm guilty of that too. So we often hear our parents say, finish what's on your plate. And maybe that comes from a mindset and a generation that was worried about just putting enough food on the table. But what does that do? It cues us to factor in external cues of hunger, or rather ignore our internal cues of hunger. So even though your body is telling you I'm full, you're being forced to eat, as a result of which over a period of time we start to ignore what our bodies are telling us, right? So this intuitive eating literature suggests that attention to internal cues is over a period of time associated with better weight stability. So essentially what we're saying is that at the point that you're receiving this content, you're probably already an adult, which means that all these factors that have determined your eating habits in childhood is something to get cognizant of. And then there is that one devil which no one can escape: marketing. Social media is there. The way food is marketed today, honestly, I am shocked at how there's no we're not seeing criminal cases about this every day. Here is an example. It's a short video on how this gentleman is going to rebrand something that is extremely unhealthy and convince you that you should put it in your kids' lunch boxes.
Yeah, it needs to be done. I'm going to rebrand candy corn to sound like a health food. Now, I'm not going to waste your time here trying to convince you that candy corn is elite, but it is. Having candy in the name, it's never going to sound healthy, so we have to change it. Honey is one of the ingredients in candy corn, so I'm going to use that and call these honey harvest kernels. And since they're using honey, I'll add with real honey. To this day, one of the coolest things I've ever learned is that when you put candy corn together, it looks like corn on the cob. So that's what I want to use as my image. But my focus here is going to stay on the honey because that is the healthy aspect of this candy. So let's throw in some honeycomb and some bees. Removing candy from the name, I guess it could be a little misleading. So at the bottom, I'm just going to put wholesome corn kernel candy, and we'll say artificially flavored because you always got to bury that. I'll highlight the fact that these are fat-free and gluten-free. And what's crazy about a product like this is that it uses corn syrup, a bunch of colorings, but there's no high fructose corn syrup, and there's technically not any artificial sweeteners. There's artificial flavors and colors, but not sweeteners. So I'm going to add that. And in an effort to make this sound natural without actually saying as much, I'm going to add nature's sweet treat to the top. That's just a tagline and I could use it. I did add some corn stalks to this design to fill in the gaps, but I didn't like the way it looked. So instead, I'm going to use wheat. And these are gluten-free, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it looks way better. And for this, I'm just about the aesthetics. There it is. There is our healthy candy corn. Let me know what you...
Amazing, right? Ready to put that in your kids' lunch boxes? Remember this, if you are opening up a bag, chances are it's not good for you, right? Food that goes in a bag, do not believe the marketing that goes on it. I would know, worked on it for 15 years. Not that stuff, but heaps of others. But essentially, what are we saying here? That there are all these factors. We've talked about society, we've talked about culture, we've talked about upbringing, we've talked about, what else? Yes, absolutely, advertising. And now we come to that little individual sitting in the middle of all of this, right? What do we have? We have our biology to tell us what to eat, and we're all rational thinking individuals who are extremely capable of making good food choices for ourselves, right? Absolutely not. So this is the biology of hunger, right? While of course it's a very complex subject, there are two main hormones that drive energy balance or homeostasis in our systems. There's ghrelin and there is leptin, right? Ghrelin secreted in the stomach sounds like the word growling. So when your stomach is growling, you know there's ghrelin getting secreted. It's what makes you feel hungry. And when you start to eat, your adipose tissue says, hey, enough, I don't need any more right now. So it starts to secrete leptin, which incidentally comes from the Greek word meaning thin, which tells us that it's time to stop eating. When ghrelin secretion goes up, leptin is down. When leptin goes up, ghrelin is down. Simple enough, not complicated, right? Now this is what our biology is telling us. Very clear signals of when you should start eating and when you should stop eating. If we listen to our bodies, it's super simple and clear. However, as human beings, how often do we really make rational choices? Right? Almost never. We eat for so many reasons that have nothing to do with hunger. I ran a quick survey on my Instagram just to ask people, what makes you eat? The number one reason was just literally palatability. It looks good, so I'm going to eat it. The least favorite options were that you need energy and you need nutrition. So really, what's going on here? If we are these rational beings who are, with these big prefrontal cortex that has this capability of putting a man on the moon, creating AI and all of that, why are we making all these poor food choices? That looks good. We look at something that's palatable and we want to eat it. No, has anyone ever looked at a plate of broccoli and said that? No? We look at cake, we look at high sugary substances, we look at high fat substances, high carb substances. Because all of these by design increase your production of ghrelin and reduce the production of leptin. What does that mean? You keep eating it, but you're not actually going to feel a sense of satiety. Everyone's eating. How can I not? We eat to fit in. But at the same time, if you're someone who sees yourself as being someone who's food conscious, then we eat in secret, right? We don't eat in front of others, but we eat in secret. So also when chances are that when you're in a group, you tend to eat more, your dietary restrictions might be lowered because, well, you know what, you're having fun. So the fact that it's social eating also plays a big role. The third one is absolutely mind-boggling. It's time to eat. How many of us look at the watch and say it's 1 p.m. so it's time for lunch? Yeah? Absolutely. Well, I'm sorry to break the news to you, but that does not stand the test of science. That is based on the notion that our food habits are based on a 12-hour cycle of when you sleep and when you wake up. But today, we have ample scientific evidence, which actually goes back to what our grandmothers told us as a part of the Ayurvedic system, that your food habits are actually connected to your circadian rhythm, which means that it rises as the sun rises and it falls as the sun sets. So in the morning when you wake up, the sun is low, you don't have digestive fire. That's technically when we should be putting the least into our systems. As the sun rises, it's at the peak at noon, that's when your heaviest meal should be. And then as the sun sets again, go super light on dinner. So that whole thing about eat breakfast like a king and dinner like a beggar, eat dinner like a beggar, but please don't eat breakfast like a king. I'm sad. How many of us are emotional eaters? Right? Who wants that chase of dopamine, that little hit that will just make you feel a little better in that moment? Again, sorry, but I hate to break the news to you. Dopamine has a very ugly cousin, and that if you get that hit of joy, right after that you will get a hit of feeling depressed and craving. Think about it. Just tune into when you have that big chocolate piece in front of you and you're eating away. You take that first bite, it gives you a nice, happy feeling. What happens immediately after that? You start suffering because you want the next bite. Not because you really want it, but because if you don't get it, you're going to continue to suffer. Happiness this is kind of getting into Nitya's terrain here, but it's a little bit of Buddhism here, isn't it? Like happiness and suffering are two sides of the same coin. This whole thing about being driven by emotions to eat. There was a very interesting story of this man. He was racing on a horse and like going at breakneck speed. And somebody asked him, "Where are you going?" He says, "I don't know, ask the horse." That's kind of what our emotions are like. We're being pulled in one direction, but we don't really know what it's about. We also eat because we're happy. You know what's interesting? Emotional eaters. When I say emotional eaters, we're all emotional eaters. But those who describe themselves as emotional eaters tend to even overeat more when they're happy rather than when they're sad. Right? Because you're in a happy space. I've just gone to the gym for an hour. I deserve it. I've earned it. I'm going to eat it. Those are all my favorite foods. Who loves a Sunday brunch buffet where everything we love is on a platter? This goes against you for two reasons. Number one, you will end up eating much more than you otherwise would. But more importantly is the science of satiety. Did you know that you need to reach satiety? When I say satiety, it's a sense of satiation. I can never get it right. Satiation and fullness for each item separately. So it will not be enough to eat one bite of pasta, one piece of cake, one bite of noodles, and one dal makhni, right? One bite. You need to eat almost the same amount that you would have if you were eating it individually, as a result of which the amount you eat goes up drastically. Starving myself is good. How many of us think this? That when I starve myself, I'm actually doing something that's good for me. Could be for religious reasons as well. What is the problem with this? Now that we've all gotten familiar with a little bit of biology and the terms, when you're in starvation mode, what is happening? Ghrelin is up, right? Leptin is down. Your body has gotten prepared to receive food. If you're not giving it food, what the signal you're sending your body is that we're entering starvation mode. When the body thinks it's in starvation mode, what does it do? It actually starts to store up reserves. Your thyroid hormones get messed up. It sets off a whole chain reaction of hormonal changes in the body, which over a period of time will not help you stabilize your weight. And I'm on a diet. Now, there was a very interesting study done with 170 nurses in California, and these were individuals who were perpetually on a diet their whole lives. What does that mean? You're trying paleo, sometimes you're trying vegan, sometimes you're trying high fat, low carb, all of these different things. And this individual, when compared with a control group, over a period of time, a longitudinal study as it's called, had much greater difficulty in managing their weight. Why is that? Because we're sending mixed signals to our body. So all of these different statements I'm not saying it's 100% of the time, but this is the observed result of putting ourselves in this in these cycles. Now I'm going to ask you, what is one thing in common with all these 8 statements here? Sure, of course. Notice how all of this originates in the mind. Notice how none of this, which influences our eating behaviors to such a great extent, actually originates in the body. None of these statements are in response to cues that our bodies are giving us about when to eat, how much to eat, right? So what we're effectively doing is top-down processing rather than bottom-up processing. We're letting our minds tell us what we should eat, when we should eat, how we should eat, whether we should eat, whether we should override hunger, whether we should override a sense of fullness, right? Rather than actually listening to simply what our bodies are saying. There is a great sense of, again, I'm going to borrow from what Nitya was talking about. We have a sense of identity. Just like we can have spiritual identity and spiritual ego, we can also have a food identity and food-related ego, where I'm somebody who is vegan, I'm somebody who doesn't eat sugar, we create all these identities around ourselves over a period of time, creating a sense of deprivation, and as a result of that, leading to unhealthy behaviors, but more importantly, just getting you disconnected from yourself. Right? So what we're going to do now very quickly, so if there was one key takeaway from everything we've told you today, is that realize that in life there will always be things that we can control and things that we can't control. But just because we can't do everything right, it doesn't mean we don't do anything, right? Question here, just to illustrate this point of top-down versus bottom-up processing. You see the items, 5 food items here. For those of you who are not from here, maybe you may not know what pani puri is. It's a favorite Indian street snack. But I'm going to ask you the 5 food items here. And think about it for a second and tell me, or rather ask yourself, according to you, which of these is the tastiest? Which of these tastes the worst? When did you last eat kale? There you go, right? We have perceptions of food. We have perceptions of what it's supposed to taste like. And incidentally, the healthier it is, the worse we think it tastes. May not actually be the case. So I want to leave you with a quick thought today that rather than letting your mind and your narrative, which actually is not in your control in the sense that there's layers and layers and layers of perceptions that lead you to those thoughts, instead focus on bottom-up processing. Learn to listen to your body, and if we have time, rather since we do, we're going to do a quick meditation. This is called the Raisin Meditation, made extremely popular by this gentleman called John Kabat-Zinn, who's credited with actually making the idea of mindfulness accessible to the West. So he runs a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, and this is one of the practices they use in it. So I request you to take one raisin in your hand, just one. right? Don't worry, lunch is soon after, you'll get to fill your stomachs. This is not about your stomach. Remember, this is about bottom-up processing, not top-down. Right? So take one raisin in your hand. Everyone has it? Can we hold it up? And you can hold it gently, don't squish it. So let's just do 3 breaths together. So we all relax and come into this space together. I'm going to teach you something called the physiological sigh. This is a proven way of relaxing your body and entering your state of rest and digest as opposed to the fight or flight mode. So how we do a physiological sigh is you sit comfortably, relax, take a deep breath in with your nose. Just when you feel like you've taken a fully deep breath, breathe in some more and then gently exhale through your mouth. Right? We'll do it together. Inhale. Inhale again. And exhale through your mouth gently. Do it twice more at your own time. Now I want you to gently bring your attention, your eyes can be open or closed, it's up to you, to that raisin in your hand. Just start by feeling it very gently. Approach it with the mind of a beginner, the mind of a child who is encountering a raisin for the very first time in your life. Just touch it, feel the different crevices on its surface. What does that texture feel like? Maybe gently press it a little bit. Notice how soft or hard it is. Now lift your hand to bring the raisin in front of your eyes. You can open your eyes. Don't get distracted. Just continue to look at the raisin. Park any thoughts that make you wonder, what is this person making me do these strange things for? Just hold it. Look at that raisin for the very first time in your life. What do you see? What are the colors? How many shades of brown are in there? Yeah. You can close your eyes, put the raisin in your mouth. Don't chew it. Resist the urge to bite. Or to rephrase, just be aware of the urge to bite. You can roll the raisin around in your mouth. See if there's any fragrances or any tastes, any textures that you feel even before you bite it. Experience what it feels like to have this raisin in your mouth as you gently roll it around your tongue. And now you can start to very gently, very intentionally start chewing into it. Do it with intention, knowing that it isn't really about the raisin. When you've chewed it a few times, notice your natural urge to take it in. Where does your mind go? Is your mind asking, what happens when I finish it? Where's my next one? Notice as the raisin goes gently into your body, through your throat, down your neck. And pretty soon, you can't feel any raisin anymore. Pretty soon, the raisin has disappeared. Pretty soon, the name of that thing which was in your mouth has changed. It's no longer called raisin. It has now become you. Just stay in awareness for a second to experience what it felt like to perhaps have eaten a raisin for the very first time in your life. Thank you.